They evicted the poor widow. But karma had other plans. Script. They evicted the poor widow. But karma had other plans. The small, crumbling house at the edge of the town had once been full of laughter, warmth, and the scent of fresh bread. It had been the home of a family that worked hard, dreamed big, and believed that kindness could hold back even the coldest winds of life. But time has its own way of testing faith, and for the widow named Maria, the storms came faster than she could rebuild. Her husband had died years ago in an accident that left her both heartbroken and penniless. With no savings, no family nearby, and only a frail body to depend on, Maria turned to what little she could do, sewing clothes for the neighborhood children, fixing torn shirts, patching old dresses, and making a few coins here and there. Her hands were thin and rough from years of work, but they never stopped moving, even when her eyes grew weary under the dim glow of her single lamp. The house she lived in had belonged to her husband's family, but after his death it became the subject of disputes. Papers she could not read, laws she did not understand. They came to define her life. The owner of the property, a man named Victor, had once been kind to her husband. But as the years passed and the value of the land increased, kindness was replaced with greed. He saw the widow's house not as a home, but as an opportunity, a prime piece of land to sell, to build, to profit from. When the eviction notice came, it was just another piece of paper to Maria. One more thing she didn't understand until the neighbors whispered what it meant. They told her she had 30 days to leave. 30 days to abandon the only place where her husband's voice still seemed to echo through the walls. 30 days to pack a lifetime into a few worn-out boxes. Victor didn't come himself. He sent his assistant, a cold man with sharp shoes and a sharper tone. He spoke of deadlines, legal rights, and market value, words that floated past Maria like a foreign language. She simply nodded, thanked him for the paper, and went back to her sewing. She hoped, perhaps foolishly, that kindness might still find her, but the world had grown indifferent. The month passed too quickly. On the morning of the eviction, Maria stood by the doorway holding her husband's old photograph. The eviction crew came, men in uniforms who didn't look at her face as they carried out the few possessions she owned. Her chair, her table, the sewing machine that had kept her alive. They placed everything on the side of the road, and one of them muttered that they were only doing their job. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply thanked them for their work, her voice trembling but sincere. The house was locked behind her, its windows shuttered, its heart gone. That night, Maria slept on the side of the road beside her belongings under a sky that refused to offer comfort. The neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, whispering in guilt, pity, and relief that it wasn't their turn. Only one old woman brought her a blanket and a loaf of bread. Maria thanked her, smiled faintly, and prayed, not for herself but for those who had forgotten compassion. Days passed. She wandered the streets asking for work. Some turned away, others offered a coin or two. Her sewing machine had been damaged during the eviction, and she could no longer earn what little she once did. Her strength weakened. Her hope began to dim. Meanwhile, Victor celebrated the sale of the property. A developer had offered him 3 times its previous value. It was an easy victory, one he justified by telling himself that business was business. The world, he believed, was for those who seized opportunity, not those who waited for miracles. But life has a quiet way of writing its own justice. Weeks later, as the construction began on the site of Maria's old home, a strange series of setbacks occurred. First, the paperwork went missing. Signed contracts, permits, all vanished without a trace. Then machinery broke down one after another for no explainable reason. Workers complained of a sense of unease, claiming they heard voices at night, whispers of sorrow that carried through the wind. Some refused to return. Victor dismissed it all as superstition, but frustration began to gnaw at him. Costs were rising, investors were growing impatient, and he was forced to pay penalties he could no longer afford. Then came the fire. It started one evening without warning. A spark from a faulty generator ignited a pile of wood. Within minutes, the unfinished building was engulfed. The flames rose high, painting the night sky orange and gold, the same color as the old curtains Maria once hung in her window. When firefighters finally subdued the blaze, nothing remained but ash and twisted steel. The insurance company refused his claim, citing negligence. In a single night, Victor lost everything he had gained from the eviction, and more. While the ruins still smoldered, The townspeople whispered about Karma. Some said they saw the shadow of an old woman standing at the edge of the fire, calm and still as if watching justice unfold. Others said it was only the smoke playing tricks. But the story spread quickly, and soon no one in town could speak of the fire without mentioning the widow who had been wronged. Victor, now burdened by debt and disgrace, left the town quietly. Months later, a charity group arrived, sent by a distant benefactor who had heard the story of the evicted widow. They searched the streets until they found Maria, frail and tired, sitting near a park feeding the birds with crumbs she had saved from her last meal. When they told her they wished to help her, she hesitated. She had grown used to disappointment, but something in their eyes, something genuine, made her believe again. They built her a small house on the outskirts of town. It was not grand, but it was warm, clean, and filled with sunlight. Her old sewing machine was repaired and placed by the window, where she could work as she used to. The community that had once turned away began to visit, ashamed of their silence. They brought her food, fabric, and friendship. Maria never spoke ill of those who wronged her. She never mentioned Victor, nor the fire, nor the whispers of karma that surrounded her story. She simply said that kindness always finds its way home, even if it takes the long road. Years passed and Maria became a quiet legend. People would point to her house and tell her story to their children, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in faith and humility. She had been evicted, humiliated, forgotten, and yet she had never cursed the world. Instead, she trusted that life had its own balance. When Maria passed away peacefully one winter morning, the town mourned her deeply. They buried her beside a small tree near her home. The next spring, that tree blossomed early, brighter than any other in the area. Its flowers seemed to glow in the sun, soft and radiant, as if nature itself bowed to her memory. The land where her old house once stood remained empty for years. No one dared to build there again. Every attempt ended in delay, failure, or mysterious misfortune. It became known as the widow's ground, a place where greed could not take root. And so, in the quiet town where one woman had been cast aside for profit, her story became a mirror to everyone's conscience. People learned to lend a helping hand before turning away. They learned that success without compassion is hollow. They learned that even when the world seems cruel, the scales of life will always find their balance. Maria's legacy was not written in wealth or fame, but in the silent transformation of those who remembered her. She became a symbol of endurance, faith, and the quiet strength that cannot be destroyed by injustice. And as the years rolled on, her story traveled beyond the town, told in schools, in sermons, in hushed tones among those who had lost hope. It was said that whenever someone wronged the helpless, the wind would carry the memory of the widow who had been evicted, and remind them that karma has patience, but it never forgets. For in the end, life always gives back what we give to others, in time, in kind, and often when we least expect it. And as the sun set behind the quiet hills, casting its golden glow over Maria's little home, it felt as though the world itself was whispering her truth, that no one who gives love and kindness ever truly loses anything. They simply wait for the day the universe returns it all, multiplied. The wind softened. The birds fell silent. The tree by her grave swayed gently, its blossoms shimmering in the fading light. And somewhere beyond what eyes could see, the soul of the widow smiled, free, peaceful, and finally home.